Oh, okay.
So moved.
Make a motion to accept those minutes of the August 20 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Susan and Angus, good.
Any discussion? None heard. We'll call for a vote. All in favor of accepting those minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion passes. The last meeting we have are minutes from the Personnel Committee minutes of September 14th. We have a motion to accept those minutes, please. Hello? Anyone want to make a motion to accept that Personnel Committee minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second. Joan
Second.
Gay.
Did you get your second?
Any discussion?
Yeah, the second is Joan.
The second was Joan?
Yes.
Joan Gay, yes.
Okay. Any discussion? No discussion. Call for a vote. All in favor of accepting those minutes?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? None heard. The minutes of that meeting are accepted.
Very good.
I have no communications to report on, so that completes my report up to now.
Good. Thank you very much, Kelly. All right, moving along then to committee reports. Getting some feedback here. Committee reports, if you'll notice, this is in a very abbreviated agenda. We are going to hope to keep this entire meeting to 1 hour. The purpose of having a meeting at this point every month is to make sure that we're all up to date in a timely fashion, to try to avoid having to have special meetings all the time in light of the fact that there is so much going on with the ETC committee and the DOT. So committee reports are relevant to timeliness, and we'll start with the ETC committee. Susan.
Okay. We'll do a few things in open meeting and then we will need to go into executive session. We had a legal review done of our proposed board policies, and some questions have arisen with regard to the role of a potential executive committee. And we are going to take those concerns back to the joint committee and then report back to you later at some point. And of course, the board has the authority to ultimately approve bylaws and board policies. We also are developing a workload plan for the next several months, so we know who's supposed to be doing what as we address a lot of these issues going forward. The Middletown Economic Development Committee of the City Council met, and Joe Samalas, who is the chairman of the Middletown Board, presented the merger to that board, that committee, which voted unanimously to support it. The towns of Middlefield and Durham will not be calling a town meeting for the purposes of discussing the merger and or voting to join estuary until a letter from DOT has actually been received and has been accepted by both boards. I will talk a little bit more about what the time frame for that might be. You might recall that in the interdistrict memorandum, we intended to have those votes by the Middletown members by the end of October. That is unlikely to occur at this point because Middlefield and Durham have yet to call a town meeting. The other thing that of interest that happened at the board, at the committee meeting rather, is that it did pass a recommendation to the Board of Estuary that the board authorized the joint committee to sign any contract related to the merger that has been funded fully, that is $150,000 or less. You may remember this issue from a previous meeting. The current bylaws for both boards require that anything over $50,000 be approved by the full board. This recommendation would ask for the ability of that committee to approve anything up to 150,000. Just for your information, we are talking about a total with regard to this merger of 16 studies. And of those, 12 have actually been funded. 7 are less than 50,000, so could be signed by Joe or Leslie by themselves. 4 of the studies are between 50 and 150,000. 1 is over 150,000. The reason for this suggestion is that it will provide some increased flexibility to not have to wait for a full board meeting. You should understand that all of these studies are to be conducted under the auspices of Estuary, because Estuary will be the expanded district and the money for the studies has been provided to Estuary. Now, this all came about too prior to our decision to move to a monthly meeting schedule. Joe, can you clarify for me whether these studies would be competitively bid or single source?
They all have to be competitive bid.
They all have to be competitively bid. Okay. Now, we did bring this up at a previous board meeting, and there was frankly some discomfort with it, which I understand, and which we've relayed back to the joint committee. And even though we have a recommendation to this board from that committee that it approve the signing of contracts at 150,000 or less, we have no decision, of course, on that has been made. So if I could throw that out to everyone and ask your opinions about whether you are willing to do that, whether you don't want to, and all opinions are, of course, respected and valued. So let us know what your thinking is on that.
And these studies under the $150,000 basis would then get approved and passed without the board having seen them?
That would be correct. We would probably come back to the board with the details of that, and as the scope and that kind of thing for each study is prepared, we would fill the board in. So it would not be a complete surprise as to what was happening. But yes, that would be the point of it, Charlie, is to permit the transition committee to approve those contracts without having to wait for full board approval.
Not sure I feel overly comfortable about that, $150,000.
I'm sorry, Charlie, you do?
I say I don't feel quite fully
Okay.
comfortable about that at a number of $150,000 getting board approval.
I raised this concern last time, and I agree with Charlie on this. This is no lack of confidence and faith of the people involved. I personally, if I were in that situation, I wouldn't want to bear that responsibility without consulting with a variety of people, including the board. So I have concerns too.
Okay. Tim, you're muted, Tim.
Do we have an aggregate number for all these studies? And 16 studies is a lot of studies. I guess it's necessary, but in total, what do you estimate would be the total number of dollars?
It's about $1.6 million.
Okay.
About I would say about 500,000 has not been funded yet. But we have the funding for the others. Some of these are operational studies, Tim. They're new software for run cutting, they're audio visual, then some are branding or PR. There's some money for human resource study, a legal study for the union issue. So the type of study is frankly all over the lot. Some are highly technical, some are much more policy oriented.
And these would all be funded before the final approval would be made.
They're all funded now for the most part, except for 4.
And those are the big ones?
Some of the big ones, we have some big ones that have been funded. The primary one that has not yet been funded is $350,000 for rebranding. That would include a new name if we do that, and new bus designs and things like that, signage and all of that, but that has not yet been funded, but all the others have been funded.
The study itself has been funded. The implementing the rebranding is what's not been funded.
Oh, I'm looking at.
Because we got the marketing, we got the 100,000 for marketing PR where we'll develop all the stuff, but then the 350 to start paying for everything to happen has not been funded.
That's correct. Okay. Peter,
Yes,
do you have an opinion?
no, I'm following it. I just don't want to be the cautious one, so I'm rather happy to see Charlie and Noel because I echo their views. But
That's fine. Okay. Tim, do you have
Susan,
an opinion? I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, I want to go back. This is more procedural question. My understanding is the reason we want to move forward with this is because these projects come along. We don't meet often enough as a board to approve them. Is that what's driving this discussion?
The flexibility of quicker decision-making,
Response.
yes.
The fact now that we're meeting on a monthly basis, will that help this discussion? We obviously don't want to hold up these studies. That's not what this is about. It's making sure that the people who are responsible are going to do this and we can support them in a timely manner. So I'm begging the question, if we're now meeting monthly, will that not make it work by bringing this back to the board is my question.
I think it certainly makes it better. Because at the time this issue came up, you're quite right, we were meeting bi-monthly. And that was simply not thought to be sufficient. Joe, do you have any comment you'd like to make on Noel's point?
Yeah, I think the other piece that we were considering was that the committee is already intimately familiar with every aspect of it. And so the other part is in these big procurements, especially talking some of these more technical ones, is having to get the whole board up to speed on what we're trying to do, which takes a lot of time too. In the past, when we've done bigger, particularly technical procurements, it took some time to educate everybody on what we were doing. And we thought that, the committee, again, being so involved, is the ones best suited to know, without having to spend a lot of time and getting everyone to understand what the procurement is, go through the technical aspects, because we're going to get big proposals, like it could be 100+ page proposals that everyone's going to have to read and vote on. So
Joe,
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, this is Angus. I sit on the committee and I was part of that vote to recommend that we do this, but I want to respond to what Joe just said. I also, and more important than just being on that committee, I sit on this board, and I echo everyone's sentiment. These are big numbers to ask for the committee to be able to be authorized to spend. But we are not. I did not vote to recommend this because I didn't think or want for this whole board to be aware. The whole reason for committees is so that we can dig deep and then summarize for the board. Everyone here knows that, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands that I understand that and the committee understands that. We're not trying to to say, the whole point, I think, let me just back up. The whole point on this is to try to expedite the ability of the committee to keep moving these things forward. My own feeling is that by moving these meetings to monthly, we do get a little bit more flexibility. And I don't think any of this has a timely, is so timely that that the monthly meeting will not give us time to authorize this, the board to authorize this without having to read the whole 100 pages, to let the committee make the report to the board. And that should be sufficient for the board to make their decision. There's no way that I voted to move this forward because I didn't think or want the board to be aware of everything that is going on. This is simply a way, it was a method to keep things moving, because we're all aware this process has taken so darn long and has been torturous. I just wanted to make sure that's I understand and agree with most of what everyone has said.
Thank you,
Angus,
Angus. No,
could we maybe have a meeting, maybe a special meeting devoted to the 12 that are funded, and we could, answer questions and get that block of 12 moving, and then you've got 4 that might require further study. I'm just trying to think of how we might.
well, unfortunately, Tim, while the study has been named and it's funded, we do not have any scope prepared for what that study is supposed to entail. So there wouldn't be anything to discuss with anyone other than what's already a paragraph blurb on the study that's in the transit study. So we don't know once we put them out for bid. Before we put them out for bid, we have to have a scope prepared of what that study is supposed to accomplish, and presumably the transit or the transition committee would play a role in that scope, and review it and understand it. And to Angus's point, this is a lot of legwork for a board to go through to support the staff that's doing the work to try to keep it moving. It's not a situation of not trusting anyone, but bringing a full board up to speed on this many studies could be very tedious and onerous for everyone involved, not just the staff people, but the board. So the answer to your very reasonable suggestion is that we don't have anything more to say now about any of these studies than we've already decided or shared with everybody, or than what's already in the transit study.
Charlie, this
Um,
unfunded 360,000. What's the story on it ahead? We haven't approved it, and but it sounds as if it's part of the money that we have to authorize promptly. Is that reasonable or unreasonable? It's the one that bothers me.
The 350,000 is the actual implementation, Peter, of the rebranding recommendations. That will not take place for probably a year or two, because
That'll eliminate me. Thank you.
it's way far in the future. And when I say funded, I mean that the Department of Transportation has programmed the money to pay for the studies. And most of it's federal money.
Thank you.
Okay. Carl, do you?
Susan,
Yeah.
you mentioned, I think there were 18 studies that are under
16,
consideration.
16.
Whatever the number is, I was wondering if it's possible to send to the board members just a list of what those studies are. So at least we can have an understanding of what's
I
going
thought,
on,
okay, I thought
not
we had done,
necessarily the details.
Joe, I thought we had done that, but I'm.
That was the last meeting, so we'll send it again or maybe we didn't, but it's studies and procurements, right,
Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah.
So some of it's item, some of it is
there's a
Things
car.
we're purchasing.
There's
Okay, thank you, Joe.
stuff in there. Carl, do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I can't, I find it hard to believe that we're all gonna sit here and read 16 or read proposals for 16 different studies, make a decision, and then this group is all gonna coalesce around one vendor. I think it's a better use of everyone's time to streamline it and allow the committee to have some flexibility to move forward. It was noted that these all have to be bid. You've got the DOT supervising you, so if there's an error in process, it may not be known to the board, but it'd certainly be known to staff and it'll be known to DOT.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem expediting this and empowering the committee because the committee is more involved in it. We don't have a list of what those studies are going to be and the price point. So you already have a bunch apparently that are in the 50,000 category that aren't going to come to the board at any rate. So we're only talking about the few that are in the 50 to 150 range.
Correct. That's 5.
We can always just make it, the studies go forward because the study is just a study. And then the implementation pieces can always come back to the full. That's more meaningful and that's when we're moving forward to making progress.
Okay. Let's see, who else will we, Leslie, do you have an opinion?
I like Angus's thought that the committee certainly can provide summarized opinions and detail that. I don't see there's any reason for this board to have to look at 100-page reports in order to, I think we trust the committee's decision on things, but we certainly are conflicted about the 150. Is it possible to do any of this by email and get consensus, or do we have to go to special meetings?
I think doing anything by email would be so laborious in terms of people being able to ask questions and get answers and make sure that everybody hears the same information at reasonably the same time. At this point, we have 3 members who are firm in their concern about doing this. Noel, Charlie, and Peter. Joan, I'm sorry. Joan, you're on the committee, but would you like to weigh in?
You're muted, Joan.
Joan, can you hear me? Okay, I don't know where.
Okay,
Joan, oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm in favor of this for the reasons that Angus had mentioned. We need it for the flexibility. I have no problem continuing with moving forward with this.
Okay.
I don't know if it would be helpful, Joe, if you could put up the list of the projects that we're talking about as a reminder for everybody to see what they are, instead of trying to remember it from memory.
Well,
Joe's going to send that out to everybody so that they have it in their hands, and then as things come up, it'll be easier to discuss them.
okay. What we've tried to do in this process on the joint committee, as well as on this board, is to arrive at, wherever possible, a unanimous decision of support, and we are clearly not there. I'd like to make a recommendation that since we don't have any studies being let in the next month or so, and we don't have our grant and procurement person, that we send the list of the studies out and that we bring this back to the October meeting for a formal vote. And Joe, would that time frame still work for you?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I think, we're all of those involved in this process, directly or indirectly, are loath to impose something on anyone who has a strong feeling, and I don't detect any ambivalence by Noel, Charlie, and Peter. If your concern is primarily personal liability, and the joint committee is willing to accept that responsibility, that may factor into your decision. But I think with that, I'd like to leave this topic and
I just had a quick reminder too, our board and officers
I'm
insurance.
sorry.
Our board and officers insurance covers any personal liability any board member would have.
Okay. Okay. Well, there's that, but I think what Noel and Charlie and Peter are referring to is the other type of liability, as in you did what? How could you approve this without thinking of these various things? And it's not a legal issue as it could be a performance issue, I guess. So I think what we'll do is, as good discussion, we'll report this back to the joint committee, and then we will plan to bring this up for a vote at the October meeting, having given you a list of all these projects that we're talking about. What I'd like to do, Leslie, at this point, if we could, is jump to executive session for purposes of discussing contract negotiations.
And then we'll go back to the personnel committee report. The only problem I have with that is we were thinking that we could stay in executive session and discuss both items if necessary without having to go in and out. So I was thinking perhaps the personnel committee report should precede executive session. Is that a problem?
No, except that I need to come back into my committee to put in writing what you want in writing, which has to be done in public meeting, not in executive session. So however you want to do it is fine with me.
Well, I like, Charlie's got good insight into many of these things. I hate to say I'm hanging on his coattails, but I like the way you look into them, and I am reassured by how you've approached it. So thank you.
Okay.
Are we talking about the letter, Susan? Because that's a new business item. So we'll come back to it anyway.
No, the letter's not going to be discussed back under new business.
We're going to discuss it under executive session, and then
No, I mean, the approval on the record that we wanted.
we'll go to executive session and explain that.
Okay.
Susan, I defer to you. You want to go into executive session now? That's fine with me.
Okay, let's do that as long as, or we could do executive session for personnel and then just add mine to that.
Except that I would like to hear the personnel committee report before executive session.
Okay.
Why don't we do, let's just do it that way. I'm sorry. But if you're done so far with your report, then I would like to move on to the personnel committee report.
Okay.
And for the record, Charlie, if you'll note, please, that Tim is here. I don't know if we acknowledge Tim's presence.
Yeah, I've noticed him on the
Hi. Okay, fine. Thank you then for the ETC committee report. And let's move on then. Number 2, personnel committee report. Noel?
Yeah, we approved the minutes here about half an hour ago, and everybody's read them. The one motion that we made after, I think, a very appropriate discussion. We had our health director from the town of Westbrook. I think it helped us. But you saw that motion. The discussion was as follows. Joe Comerford made a motion to recommend to the EDA Board of Directors to not implement a COVID vaccine requirement yet, but to develop a policy to incentivize for COVID vaccine participation. Susan Tyler seconded. The motion was passed unanimously. So that's the motion. The only question I would have then is who is going to develop that policy and what's the timeline? I think that's what should be decided today.
All right, Joe, do you have any update on incentivization programs? I mean, what we're trying to do is, instead of punishing drivers or staff who are not vaccinated, we're trying to say to everybody, oh, what a great idea, but in fact, you've got to incentivize in such a way that those who have already been vaccinated are included in whatever we come up with. Is that what the idea here, Noel? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. I think that was the consensus of the group. There was a lot of discussion. There was considerable concern if we found a way financially to do this. I think that was a problem for us. We didn't think that was a good idea. But again, that's the motion, I think, just captures where we are. We need more time to work on this, to develop a policy.
How much time do you think you need?
I think when we discussed was getting some thoughts from our attorney, and then having another personnel committee meeting in time to make a recommendation at the October regular meeting.
I like that
Okay.
suggestion. Very amenable, Joe. If we can talk with the attorney and let's get some information. I'm willing to confer with you anytime. Also have our health director involved. I think we've got time in the next 4 weeks to put this together and bring it to the October board meeting.
And I'll just say quickly, the reason we wanted the attorneys, because the last time we did an incentive, there were several considerations that the attorney, had for us, and it's why we carefully crafted the last policy to minimize any possible concerns that pitfalls there. So we'd want to do the same thing again.
Also, as our health director pointed out, we also want to be as much as possible in sync with whatever mandates are coming out from the governor. And they come out sometimes every week or every other week. So I think that giving this another month will help us put this together.
All right, my biggest concern when I brought this up at the last meeting is the timeliness of this issue, that I'm hoping that we can expedite this. If you've got all the answers by the next meeting, that would be wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you, Noel.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Noel? Any more for report, Noel?
No, that does it. So Joe, we can leave this then. You'll be in touch with the attorney and stay in touch with me. Is that when we leave this meeting today? Will that be the next steps, Joe?
That's correct.
Yeah, fine.
Does
I think that's
this
the report then.
does this require a motion?
I don't think it requires a motion. It's a committee report and they've updated us on how they're proceeding. I don't think we have to authorize anything. Is there anybody else have a thought on that?
Okay.
I think we're good to move on. Yes? Okay. Hearing no objections, I'd like to propose that we move to executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations with the DOT and attorney-client privileged communications. Is there a
You
anybody
want a motion?
motion? Peter? Second?
Oh, Joan.
Joan, thank you. All right, it is 10:10. We are in executive and thank you. It's 10:45. Yes, Susan?
Do you want me to restate what our plan is?
Yeah, let's go back to Susan under the ETC committee and just recap. Go ahead.
Okay. It has been agreed that each member of the Ninetown Transit Board will brief his or her elected officials on the status of negotiations regarding the future expansion of estuary, and that they will receive authorization from those local elected officials to accept a letter from DOT as submitted.
Is there somebody accept that motion? Someone want to?
It's not a motion.
Not a motion?
Nope. We're just saying that's
You're
what we
looking for a
agreed.
consensus?
That's what we agreed to do.
Okay, let's get a consensus then on Susan's suggestion that we all go back to the respective towns, get authorization to move forward, specifically to sign this letter with the DOT. Everybody who agrees with that suggestion, please raise your hand or say something. Joan?
I do.
Okay.
agree.
Noel, is your
I
hand up?
agree.
All
Yeah,
right, anyone
I agree.
disagreeing with that? Anyone have any further comments about that? In that case, fine, you've all got your marching orders. Thank you, Susan, for that proposal. Anything else that you wanted to mention under ETC?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, very good, thank you. Joe, Executive
Leslie,
Director.
Leslie, before we leave this, obviously we go back, some of us, I is in a different position here. Are we gonna put this back on the agenda in October? I mean, we go back,
Absolutely.
when do you want to hear
absolutely.
from us from this?
I think it would be prudent just to give me and or Susan a quick update saying I'm good or I'm bad or whatever, so that we know what we're doing coming into the October.
Okay,
All right, if
Let-
you could just get back to us.
Let's just say that the plan would be to have a motion at the October meeting to authorize Leslie to sign it. So in order to do that, we would need feedback from you all by that date.
Good, thank you. Noel, does that answer your question?
yes, it does, thank you.
Okay, very good. Joe, the Executive Director's report, please.
But could I just make one point? Do we want to
Oh,
make,
sorry.
do we want to make a uniform resolution or something for the Board of Selectmen that if they agree, there would be a standard text that we would all use, so it's not all over the lot?
Good point.
That seems to
what do
make
we-
sense.
What are we asking the Board of Selectmen to do to authorize their representative to vote in favor of having the letter signed and so forth? I mean, it ought to be something pretty official so that we have it all uniform.
I'll draft something, Tim,
Thank you.
and include that as part of the summary.
Good.
Good,
Thank you, good point. Any other comments before we move forward? Okay, Executive Director's report, please, Joe.
Okay, I'll keep it real short. So our $1.8 million capital grant for this year has been awarded. But it's kind of, we alluded to earlier, some things are good, kind of help as we wait for our procurement position to come online, because we do have most of the procurements require RFPs, and that takes a lot of legwork. So we're hoping that we'll get that soon and get those procurements out. We got our fiscal year 2022 transit operating documents from DOT. This is the document that provides our operating funds, and it had a 3% overall increase across the board. So we did get a small increase this year. And then finally, we completed our Park Connect service. Overall, we had a rough summer to be piloting this with the extremely rainy weekends, especially holiday weekends. So it probably could have done better if the weather had cooperated more. But overall, the weekend ridership was pretty strong. And what we did clearly see was that there is Sunday service needed on our Route 641. On the rainiest days, we'd have 30, 40 trips. On the nicer days, we saw as much as like 60, 70 trips. So, and that was really with not a lot of notice in advance and with it being a temporary service. So clearly there's a need for Sundays, and even the holidays were well utilized on those routes. So definitely there's a need, as we've been saying, and our study indicated, and I think it helps us make the case of getting that funded on a permanent basis, for those non-park related services. But the trolley did very well too on the weekends. Weekdays were not so busy. And we'll be meeting with, we already had one meeting with DOT, but we're going to also meet with DEEP and DOT to kind of go over what the plan is for next year, go over the results from this year, plan for next year. And that's all.
Questions, comments, concerns? No, Joe, thank you very much. Motion to accept the Executive Director's report.
so moved.
Second,
We got Peter and Angus. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Anybody opposed? No. Thank you, Joe. New business, we are tabling, as we've discussed ad infinitum, the DOT letter authorization. Number two, the advertising contract. Joe, can you elaborate, please?
Sure. So our contract for advertising on the buses is the original terms over. We're down to option years, and we are due to exercise an option year. They pay us 52% of the net revenue off of the advertising sales. Prior to COVID, we were seeing like 30,000 or so a year in revenue. Obviously, the COVID impacted it, but it does say things were better in our area than many others, and are starting to come back. But yeah, we're into the option year, so we would have to, if we want to continue, we need to exercise the option year.
Other thoughts other than mine on continuing the advertising contract? Because you probably know where I'm coming from on this.
How long does it go for, Joe, the option?
They're one-year options.
And that would start when and end when?
September 1st and ends August 31st. So we would do one option year now, unless you want to do more than one, but we would do one option year that would end August of next year.
One thing to keep in mind, I think, is that down the road soon enough, we will be rebranding and combining fleets. Middletown is covered with advertising right now. It's their problem. But I mean, since nobody else has jumped in, I'll just say I absolutely abhor the ads on the buses. And I personally do not want to extend any contract. That's me. Who else?
Hello, Leslie. I was wondering where you were hiding. But John isn't here to make it difficult.
Yeah, thank you for some things. Yeah, does anyone have any feelings on this? Because I don't want to belabor it, but as Joe is saying, you know, we have received up to $30,000 a year. Do we need that money in light of COVID funding and everything that's going on? Is there concern that if we don't have the money, that we're going to go back to the towns looking for some makeup of revenues? Anybody got to weigh in here, people? Come on.
What?
Who likes
This
the
is I've never seen a board meeting be suddenly go quiet like this one.
We're talking about the back of the bus only.
The other thing Leslie mentioned was that Middletown has a contract for advertising with the same company, but theirs does not limit the advertising. It is all over the bus. So that was another thing Leslie and I spoke about. It's possible that I suggested, I wouldn't say Leslie did, but I said we might want to extend the contract, you know, till we get the two systems merged and we can have one direction together, rather than go two completely separate directions right now with no advertising on one and advertising everywhere on the other.
And yet, if we have no advertising on one, perhaps that gives us greater leverage to say to the other, shouldn't do it.
Well,
on.
Leslie, I just don't think we could just at this point give up $30,000.
Okay,
Unfortunately, I think the advertising is terrible too. But I think we need the money.
do we, Joe, do we need this money? Do you see concern about going back to the towns for any deficit?
Long-term, it's nice to have. Right now, we have this CARES money. That's not forever. It's finite. So as a long-term strategy, it makes sense to have sources from other places. And it's not a lot of money, but what I've found when I talk to towns is they always like to hear that we're being creative and looking for other sources of revenue other than that.
Anybody else?
And our first selectman.
Do we have, Joe, do we have any control, do we have any control over what the ads actually look like on the buses?
Yeah,
Minimum. We have some, but it is because they are publicly owned, there's First Amendment issues. So we can strongly encourage them to look a certain way, but we can't restrict somebody's free speech either. And of course, artwork is free speech.
Well,
I
I have,
guess that settles it. Can we
Susan?
move
The
on?
advertising company is usually good about subtly telling people that, because I mean, it's something we would find ugly, probably is not a good ad. So that's usually their standpoint is, if your ad's not effective, it could be a lot more effective if we do this. Get the most of your money. But you still have some people who insist, nope, I like that, even though it's ugly and not effective.
but we can restrict content to the degree that we don't want political statements. We don't want
Yes, we
religious
can.
statements.
There are certain allowable things. I would like tobacco, alcohol. We have a policy that says what's restricted. And we've also said, what do we call it? What we found was allowable. Issue ads. We don't allow any issue ads because we didn't want to get into any sort of political issue debates that has happened in other transit districts where you get something controversial advertised by one side on an issue, and then the other side wants to advertise their position, and you get back and forth, dueling ads. So we ban all issue advertising. So as long as we have it at that kind of high level, it's okay.
Right.
But we
Are there
couldn't
any
get
other,
into-
any other comments? Because we should push forward with some kind of a vote on whether or not to take the 1-year option.
I'll just say that in the past, I have been opposed to advertising. I do think that Joe makes a good point, which is that we're heading into a time frame where all kinds of things are going to change. I would opt to retain the contract for the time being.
Okay, there's a motion then to have Joe go back and take the 1-year option to renew. Is there
I'll second,
someone
I'll
would like-
second, I'll second,
Second?
I'll second that. I'll second.
Okay. All in, for any discussion, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, hands and or whatever.
Aye.
1, 2,
Aye.
3, 4.
I agree.
Don't agree. All opposed? That would be me. I oppose. Any abstentions? Okay, Joe, go for it. Hate this stuff. Anything else under new business? I see nothing. No. Is there old business?
Nope.
Okay, chair comments. I have in front of me a very disturbing and upsetting letter of resignation from our Lyme representative, effective October 29th of this year. That would be from Susan Tyler, in case you're not wondering who's from Lyme. And the letter does state that she has tremendously enjoyed participating in this organization, and she knows it will continue to provide valuable service to the residents of the Lower Connecticut River Valley. Susan, it is with tremendous regret that I accept your letter of resignation on behalf of Nine-Town Transit. I know you've already submitted this to the town of Lyme, and they are aggressively pursuing a replacement for you. I don't see how they're ever going to manage to do that. In the meantime, and I know I'm speaking for everyone when I say this is a tragic loss to this board. And I'm going to sabotage your move to California as best I possibly can. We do, as you can see, we will have some vacancies on this board, not just as a treasurer, but as chair of the MOA ETC committee, member of the personnel committee. And we are going to need the rest of you to figure out how to step and fill these voids. I'm not asking you to do that right this second. Keep in mind, you have until the next meeting to see whether or not there's something you feel comfortable with. You can contact me directly or Joe or whomever. I'm just very sad about this. And that's my chair comment. That's all I have to say. Moving on to board member comments, anyone? Hearing none. Our next meeting will be October 15th, 9:30 a.m. Remote options and/or you can go to Middletown if you wish. Motion to adjourn, please. Angus? So Susan, did you just or Tim, second? All in favor of adjourning at, oh, look at this,
Aye.
11:02. Sorry about that.
Before we adjourn, not to the meeting, Joe, could you call me right after this meeting? We want to have a status report where we are at that Westbrook facility. So Joe, could you give me a call as soon as this meeting is over, please?
Sure.
Okay. Other than that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much. I hope to hear from you soon, but I'll see you in October.